June 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. Sergeant Michael Grayson had 3 seconds to decide. His unit was trapped under deadly German fire. The radio was dead. The superior officer had been hit. 22 men looked to him, waiting for orders. Grayson could wait for reinforcements, ask for permission, follow protocol. Or he could act. He didn't ask for permission. He yelled, "With me!" and ran straight into the enemy bunker. 17 men followed him. 5 died, but 12 survived because one soldier understood that on the battlefield, those who wait for permission expect death. 80 years later, you're still waiting for someone to authorize your life. Michael Grayson's grandson found his diaries hidden in a rusty box in the attic 3 months after his funeral. Among brutal accounts of battles and lists of the dead, a 1945 entry was marked in red. "I saw men die not because they were weak, but because they waited for permission to be strong. I saw men lose the war before it began, because they needed someone to tell them they could fight." The greatest slavery does not come from chains. It comes from waiting for someone to set you free. What Grayson discovered on that bloody day in Omaha completely changed his understanding of freedom, authority, and destiny. You will discover why living by asking permission is the slowest and most brutal way to die without ever having lived. That June morning in 1944, as Sergeant Michael Grayson ran toward the German bunker without waiting for anyone's permission, he wasn't just saving 12 men. He was discovering the most brutal and liberating truth a human being can discover. The truth that no one will give you permission to live the life you should be living. No one will sign a document authorizing you to be strong. No one will approve your transformation. No one will validate your right to fully exist. And if you wait for that permission, you will die waiting. Grayson saw this happen hundreds of times during the war. Capable, trained, armed soldiers, but paralyzed because they waited for someone to tell them it was okay to act, that it was okay to survive, that it was okay to take command of their own existence. And while they waited, they died, not for lack of ability, but for lack of inner authorization. In the diaries his grandson found decades later, Grayson wrote something devastating. "I realized that most men don't live under physical slavery. They live under psychological slavery. They have become prisoners of an invisible authority that will never give them permission to be free. This authority can be parents, society, fear, shame, the past, or simply the belief that they don't have the right to decide about their own lives. And this prison is far more efficient than any concentration camp, because the prisoner carries the bars inside his own head." Grayson understood that in combat, hesitation is death, but he discovered that in civilian life, hesitation is something worse. It's slow. Death, it's living decades without ever truly being alive. It's existing in a permanent state of waiting, always waiting for someone to authorize you to begin, to change, to act, to be who you should be. You live in this prison right now. You may not realize it. You may think your decisions are your own. But if you pay attention, you'll notice that you don't make most of your important choices. You wait. You wait for the situation to improve. You wait to feel confident. You wait for someone to validate you. You wait for circumstances to align perfectly. You wait for someone to tell you that you can, that you should, that you deserve it. And while you wait, life passes you by. Opportunities disappear. Relationships die. Dreams rot. And you keep waiting. Because at some point in your life you internalize the belief that you have no authority over your own existence, that you need external permission to make any meaningful move. And that belief keeps you trapped in a way that no physical chain ever could. Grayson saw soldiers waiting for permission to fire while the enemy was already firing, waiting for permission to move while they were already under fire, waiting for permission to survive while death was already decided. And he realized that this wasn't just military incompetence. It was deep psychological conditioning. These men had been trained their entire lives to wait for authorization. At school, they waited for the teacher to allow them to speak. At home, they waited for their parents to approve of their choices. In society, they waited for someone to tell them it was okay to be who they were. And when they arrived on the battlefield, they kept waiting. Waiting for a superior to give them the order. Waiting for the situation to be clear enough. Waiting for the risk to be acceptable. and they died waiting. Because war doesn't wait for you to be ready, and neither does life. Grayson's great discovery was simple but revolutionary. He realized that authority is not given, it is taken, not in the sense of stealing power from others, but in the sense of taking full responsibility for one's own decisions, actions, and consequences. He saw that the soldiers who survived were not necessarily the strongest or the best trained. They were those who made decisions without waiting for external approval, those who acted based on their own judgment, not on external validation, those who took command of their own lives, even when no one had given them that authority. And this completely changed his way of leading. He stopped giving orders and began to create soldiers who didn't need orders. He stopped authorizing actions and began to develop men who authorized themselves. Listen carefully, soldier. Sergeant Grayson can no longer fight this battle, but his mission lives on through every person who understands this message. If you recognize that you live asking for permission, if you feel trapped waiting for someone to free you, if you realize you are wasting your life waiting for authorization that will never come, then leave your like now. It's not about algorithms. It's about taking command. It's about saying you understand that no one will give you permission to live. You need to take that permission. Grayson needs you to do this. Leave your like and declare war against the invisible slavery that keeps you waiting. 2 weeks after Omaha, Sergeant Grayson was in a small, recently liberated French village. A young soldier named Private Daniel Briggs approached him with a question. Briggs was 20 years old, a good marksman, and followed orders perfectly, but Grayson sensed something was wrong. Briggs asked, "Sergeant, when do you think I'm ready to lead a patrol?" Grayson looked at him for a long time and replied, "You'll never be ready if you keep waiting for me to tell you that you're ready. You're waiting for my permission. And while you wait, you're telling me that you don't trust your own judgment. You're telling me that I have more authority over your life than you do yourself." Briggs was confused. Grayson continued, "You want me to free you from a prison you built yourself, and I can't do that. Only you can." 3 days later, Briggs died, waiting for orders during an ambush. Grayson carried this guilt for decades, but he also carried the lesson. You can't free someone who chooses to remain imprisoned. The need for permission doesn't originate in war. It originates much earlier. It's born in childhood, when you learn that your desires are secondary to adult approval. It's born in school, when you discover that your curiosity needs to be authorized by the system. It's born in adolescence, when you realize that being accepted is safer than being authentic. It's born in adulthood, when you trade freedom for security, authenticity for approval, real life for approved life. And every time you ask for permission instead of making a decision, you reinforce the prison bars. You train your brain to believe that you have no authority over your own existence, that your choices need to be validated externally, that you can't trust your own judgment, and eventually you become so dependent on external approval that you completely lose the ability to authorize yourself. Grayson saw this destroy capable men, soldiers who could calculate mortar trajectories, who understood military tactics, who had years of training. But when the moment came to decide without a superior present, they froze, not because they didn't know what to do, but because they lacked the internal permission to do what they knew needed to be done. They had completely outsourced their authority. They depended on external validation for every significant move. And in combat, where decisions need to be made in fractions of a second, this dependence was fatal. Grayson wrote in his diary, "I saw men die not because the enemy was stronger, but because they didn't believe they had the right to save their own. Lives without superior permission. It's the saddest form of death, to die because you think you need permission to live. You do this now in ways you don't even realize. You want to change careers, but wait for someone to tell you it's a good idea. You want to end a relationship that's destroying you, but wait for someone to validate your decision. You want to start something new, but wait for the perfect moment, which is actually just another way of waiting for permission from circumstances. You want to set boundaries, but wait for others to understand, to approve, not to get upset. You want to live differently, but wait for society to authorize you to be different. And while you wait, you grow older. You accumulate regrets. You build a life that isn't yours, but that has been approved by everyone around you. And one day you wake up and realize you've lived an entire life waiting for permission to live your own life. The most brutal trap of this prison is that it's invisible. You don't see the bars. You don't feel the chains. You think you're free, you think you're choosing, but if you pay attention, you'll realize that your choices always depend on external validation. You don't decide based on what's right for you. You decide based on what will be approved by others. You don't act based on your judgment. You act based on what others expect of you. You don't live based on your values. You live based on not disappointing anyone. And that seems like prudence. It seems like maturity. It seems like responsibility. But it's slavery. It's living as a prisoner of others' expectations while calling it freedom. Grayson understood that the most dangerous soldier wasn't the enemy with a weapon. It was the ally who waited for permission while everyone around him died. July 1944. Grayson's unit had liberated a small town in France. Among the rescued prisoners was a man named Henri, 52 years old, a mathematics teacher. Henri had been captured by the Germans 2 years earlier. Grayson asked why he hadn't tried to escape, since the camp where he was imprisoned was relatively unguarded. Henri replied something Grayson never forgot. "I hoped someone would come to save me. I hoped the war would end. I hoped the guards would change their minds. I never considered that I could simply decide to leave." Grayson was shocked. Henri had every physical and mental capacity to escape, but he had completely surrendered his agency to external authorities. He had become psychologically incapable of making decisions about his own freedom. Grayson noted, "I knew a man who was a prisoner not because he was imprisoned, but because he hoped for permission to be free." There's a specific moment in life where you choose between authorizing yourself or waiting for eternal authorization. This moment isn't dramatic. It doesn't come announced. It happens silently, in a seemingly small decision. You have an idea, a desire, a dream, and you make a choice. Either you act, based on your own judgment, taking full responsibility for the consequences, or you seek external validation, wait for approval, ask for permission, and this choice, repeated 1,000 times over the years, determines whether you will live as a free person or as a voluntary prisoner. Grayson saw soldiers making this choice every day. Some chose to trust their own judgment. Others chose to wait for someone to tell them what to do. And the difference between these two groups wasn't in their abilities. It was in their willingness to take authority over their own existence. The hardest truth Grayson discovered is that most people don't want real freedom. They want security. And security, in their minds, means not having to make difficult decisions, not having to take responsibility for outcomes, not having to bear the weight of wrong choices. So they willingly surrender their authority to others, to parents, to bosses, to spouses, to society, to any external entity that can be held accountable when things go wrong. And they call this prudence, humility, wisdom. But it's cowardice disguised as virtue. It's a refusal to grow disguised as respect. It's a fear of living disguised as caution. Grayson wrote, "A man who needs permission to live is not humble. He is a coward, and he will die blaming everyone around him for a life he himself refused to take." You are at this point of choice right now. In every important decision you postpone, in every dream you put off, in every change you know you need to make but wait for the right moment, you are choosing to remain a prisoner. You are choosing to outsource your authority. You are choosing to wait for someone to give you permission to do what you already know you should do. And each time you make that choice, it becomes harder to do things differently next time, because you accumulate evidence that you are not capable of deciding for yourself, that you need external validation, that you have no authority over your own life, and eventually, even when the prison doors open, you don't leave, because you have become so accustomed to waiting for permission that you have completely lost the ability to authorize yourself. Grayson saw this happen with Henri. Even after being released, Henri couldn't make simple decisions without seeking the opinions of multiple people. He couldn't choose where to live, what to eat, how to live, without constantly seeking external approval. 2 years in a prison camp hadn't broken him, but 50 years of waiting for others to decide for him had made him psychologically incapable of true freedom. Grayson realized that the most efficient prison has no guards. It only has prisoners who believe they need guards. And these prisoners will spend their entire lives waiting for someone to free them, never realizing that the key was always in their own hands. The difference between freedom and slavery isn't in external circumstances. It's in the willingness to assume total authority over one's own choices, independent of others' approval. August 1944. Grayson's unit was constantly receiving reinforcements. New soldiers arrived straight from basic training. Young men of 18, 20 years old, scared, unprepared. One of them, Private James Ward, approached Grayson on the second night. He asked, "Sergeant, how long until I'm ready for real combat?" Grayson looked at him and said, "You'll never be ready. Nobody ever is. Do you think I was ready when I jumped off that boat in Omaha? Do you think anyone is ready to see friends die? The difference isn't being ready, it's acting without being ready." Ward was silent. Grayson continued, "You're waiting to feel confident before you act, but confidence doesn't come before action. It comes after. You act, you survive, you learn, and then you develop confidence. But if you wait to be ready first, you never start. And if you never start, you die waiting for permission from yourself. The belief that you need to be ready before you act is one of the most sophisticated forms of asking for permission. You're not waiting for permission from someone else. You're waiting for permission from a future version of yourself that will be more prepared, more confident, more capable. But that version never arrives, because it only develops through action, not through waiting. Grayson noticed that soldiers spent weeks mentally preparing for something that needed to be done immediately. And while they prepared, the situation changed. The opportunity passed, people died. He wrote in his diary, "I saw men study maps for hours when they should have been traversing the territory. I saw men plan attacks so perfectly that when they finally felt ready, the enemy had already changed position. The quest to be ready is just fear disguised as preparation. You do this constantly. You want to start a business, but you wait to have more knowledge. You want to make that change, but you wait to be more certain. You want to make that difficult decision, but you wait to be more emotionally prepared. And while you wait, you call it prudence, planning, responsibility, but it's just another way of asking for permission. You're asking permission from the universe, from time, from circumstances, from an imaginary version of yourself that will be more capable. And that permission never comes, because life doesn't prepare you for challenges. Challenges prepare you for life. You don't get strong before lifting weights. You lift weights and get strong in the process. You don't develop courage before facing fear. You face fear and develop courage through action. Grayson discovered that the soldiers who survived weren't the most prepared. They were the ones who acted with the preparation they had. They didn't expect to master every skill. They used the skills available and learned the rest on the job. They didn't expect to have all the answers. They made decisions with the information available and adjusted as needed. They didn't expect to feel completely secure. They acted despite insecurity and built security through accumulated experience. Meanwhile, soldiers who expected to be completely ready were paralyzed by the pursuit of perfection. They studied too much and acted too little. They planned endlessly and executed too late, and they paid the price of this paralysis with missed opportunities and wasted lives. War taught Grayson that imperfect action always trumps perfect preparation, because preparation without action is merely intellectualized procrastination. You're trapped in this trap now, accumulating courses, reading books, watching videos, endlessly preparing for an action you never take. And with each passing day, you become more convinced that you need more preparation, more knowledge, more certainty. But the truth is, you already know enough. You already have enough. You are already enough. What's missing isn't preparation. It's internal authorization. It's the permission. You need to give yourself to act with what you have, to be who you are, to do what you can. Grayson watched James Ward die 3 weeks later, still waiting to be ready. And he carried that as a brutal reminder that waiting to be ready is just waiting to die prepared. Soldier, listen up. Sergeant Grayson is trying to teach you something that cost him lives to learn. You don't need to be ready. You need to start. And if this message makes sense, if you recognize that you're stuck waiting for a never-ending preparation, then subscribe to this channel now. Join the platoon of people who have decided to stop asking for permission and start acting. Grayson can no longer fight for you, but you can continue his mission. Subscribe and declare that you understand, that you will stop waiting to be ready and will start becoming ready through action. September 1944. The war was advancing on Germany. Grayson had survived months of brutal combat, but something deeply troubled him. He received letters from home, letters from his wife, his parents, his friends. They all said the same thing in different words. "We are proud of you. You are doing what is right. Keep being the hero we expect you to be." Grayson felt an overwhelming weight. He wasn't a hero. He was afraid every day. He made choices that killed some to save others. He carried guilt, regret, shame, but everyone expected him to be someone he wasn't. And Grayson realized something devastating. If he survived the war, he would have to choose between living as he truly was or living as they expected him to be, between painful authenticity or comfortable approval. He wrote, "War can kill my body, but the expectations of others can kill my soul, and I don't know which death is worse." When you constantly ask for permission, you're not just waiting for authorization to act. You're shaping your entire life based on external expectations. You choose a career not for what you want, but for what your parents approve of. You choose partners not for who you love, but for who society deems appropriate. You choose how to live not based on your values, but on not disappointing anyone. And over time, you completely lose touch with who you truly are, because you've spent decades building an approved persona, a version of yourself that has been carefully edited to receive maximum validation and minimum criticism. And that persona isn't you. It's a performance, a lie you tell yourself so consistently that you begin to believe it. Grayson saw this happen with soldiers returning home. They had changed profoundly in the war. They had seen things that transformed them. But when they returned, everyone expected them to be the same, and many chose to pretend. They chose to perform the old version of themselves so as not to disappoint family and friends. They hid the trauma, suppressed the changes, denied the transformation, and they died slowly inside. Because there is nothing more destructive than living as someone you are not to receive love from people who don't really know you. Grayson wrote, "I knew men who survived the war but died in peace, because the war transformed them into someone new, but they didn't have the courage to live as that new person. They chose approval over authenticity, and they paid with their own souls. The price of living an approved life is living an unlived life. It's waking up at 50 and realizing you never did what you truly wanted to do. You were never who you truly wanted to be. You never expressed what you truly felt because you were too busy being who others needed you to be. And now you have a lifetime of external approval but zero internal satisfaction. You have a perfect resume but an empty existence. You have stable but superficial relationships. You have visible success but invisible failure, because you built a life based on other people's expectations, and now you live imprisoned in that construct. And you can't change because changing would mean disappointing everyone who approves of you for being who you pretend to be." Grayson returned from the war in 1945, and he made a brutal decision. He decided to live as he truly was, not as others expected him to be. He disappointed many people. He lost friendships. He created family conflicts, but he gained something far more valuable. He got his own life back. He stopped asking permission to exist authentically, and he discovered that the people who truly mattered remained by his side. And those who drifted away never truly knew him. He wrote, "I'd rather live one day as myself than 100 years as the version that pleases everyone, because in the end, you won't regret disappointing others. You'll regret disappointing yourself by never trying to live authentically." October 1944. Grayson was leading a night patrol when they found a wounded German soldier in an abandoned trench. The German was at most 19 years old. He was dying. He posed no threat. By military rule, Grayson should leave him there. By humanity, he should try to save him. By tactical logic, he should eliminate him so as not to reveal his position. Grayson looked at his men. They all expected him to decide. He could ask for advice by radio. He could follow strict protocol. He could pass the buck. But Grayson understood something at that moment. Real authority doesn't come from military rank. It comes from taking full responsibility for impossible decisions without waiting for someone to tell you what to do. He ordered them to treat the basic wound and leave the German with water. Some soldiers questioned this. Grayson simply said, "I decided. I accept the consequences. Follow the order." That act defined his leadership, not because it was right or wrong, but because it was his. Taking back authority isn't a dramatic declaration. It's a series of microscopic decisions where you stop seeking external validation before acting. It's choosing based on your judgment and accepting the consequences without blaming anyone. It's stopping justifying your choices to people who don't live your life. It's ceasing to explain your decisions to those who will never understand your context. It's understanding that you don't owe an explanation about how you live your life to anyone except yourself. Grayson realized that strong soldiers weren't those who never doubted. They were those who decided despite doubt. They didn't wait for absolute certainty. They acted with the information available and dealt with the consequences without shifting blame. That was real authority, not power over others, but power over oneself. You lost that authority over the years. You let your parents decide your career. You let partners decide your worth. You let society decide your goals. You let fear decide your actions. You let shame decide your limits. You let other people's expectations decide your entire life. And now you live as a stranger in your own existence, as a tenant in a life that should be yours, as an actor playing a role written by others. And the feeling of emptiness you carry doesn't come from a lack of purpose. It comes from a lack of authority. You're not living a meaningless life. You're living a life that isn't yours, and you feel it every day. In the weight of waking up to do what you don't want to do, in the exhaustion of pretending to be someone you're not, in the frustration of living according to other people's scripts. Grayson taught that regaining authority doesn't happen all at once. It happens decision by decision. You start by saying no when you've always said yes. You start by setting boundaries where you've always accepted intrusions. You start by choosing based on what you want, not on what avoids conflict. You start by taking responsibility for the consequences of your own choices without blaming circumstances. You start by living by your own rules, even when no one approves. And each time you do this, you reclaim a piece of the authority you surrendered. Each time you decide without asking permission, you strengthen your autonomy. Each time you act based on your own judgment, you rebuild self-confidence. It's a slow and painful process, because people around you will resist. They will question. They will blame you for no longer being who they need you to be. But Grayson knew that this external resistance was a sign of progress. It meant you were stopping living for others and starting to live for yourself. The authority Grayson developed in the war carried with him for the rest of his life. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't stubbornness. It was simply a refusal to delegate decisions about his own existence. He listened to advice, but decided for himself. He considered opinions, but acted on his own judgment. He respected others, but didn't allow others to dictate his life. And he died at 83 without major regrets. Not because he lived perfectly, but because he lived authentically. He took full command of his own choices and accepted all the consequences without blaming anyone. That is true freedom. Not the absence of problems, but the complete presence of authority over how you respond to problems. Soldier, listen carefully. Sergeant Grayson is showing you the way back to your own authority. If you understand that you need to stop asking for permission and start taking command, if you recognize that you live as a prisoner of others' expectations, then leave your like now. Don't abandon Grayson on this mission. Each like is a soldier taking authority over their own life. It's a declaration that you understand, that you will stop living by other people's scripts. Leave your like and take the first step back to your own freedom. November 1944. Grayson was on a temporary base when he received a letter from a childhood friend. The friend wrote about normal life at home, a recent marriage, a stable job at his father's factory, a predictable routine. He ended the letter, saying, "You must be eager to go back and have a normal life like mine." Grayson read it and felt something he didn't expect. It wasn't envy, it was horror. The idea of returning to normal life, of following the expected path, of doing what everyone else did, of being who everyone else was, filled him with profound dread. He had tasted real freedom. He had lived making life or death decisions based solely on his own judgment. He had experienced total authority over his own existence. And now, he realized he could no longer return to the comfortable prison they called normality. Grayson wrote that night, "I discovered that freedom comes at a price that few are willing to pay. The price is loneliness. Because when you stop living like everyone else lives, you stop belonging to everyone. The hardest truth about taking complete control of your own life is that you'll find yourself alone in ways you never expected. The people who loved you when you were constantly asking for permission will drift away when you stop asking. Because they didn't love you. They loved the control they had over you. They loved the controllable, predictable, acceptable version of you. And when you become uncontrollable, unpredictable, free, they no longer know how to relate to you." Grayson saw this happen with returning veterans. Families expected them to come back the same, but they had changed. They had learned to make decisions without asking for opinions. They had developed inner authority, and when they refused to return to their old roles, they were accused of having changed for the worse, of being selfish, of no longer caring about anyone, when in reality, they had simply stopped caring more about other people's expectations than about their own lives. You'll face this when you start living without asking permission. Parents will say you're being rebellious, partners will say you've changed, friends will say you've become arrogant, society will say you're selfish, and everyone will. Be right in a way. You've changed. You're no longer the person who asked permission to exist. You're no longer the person who shaped your life based on others' expectations. You're no longer the person who sacrificed authenticity for approval. And this will create distance, it will create conflict, it will create loss, because relationships built on you being controllable don't survive you becoming free. And you'll have to choose between going back to prison and keeping the relationships, or remaining free and losing people you thought were important. Grayson made that choice in 1946. He went back home. He tried to fit in. He tried to be who they expected him to be. It lasted 3 months. Then he made a brutal decision. He decided to live as he was, not as they expected him to be. He moved to another city. He cut ties with people who didn't accept the new version of him. He built a life completely different from what everyone had planned for him. And he spent years being called ungrateful, crazy, selfish. But he wrote, "I prefer to be free and alone than accepted and imprisoned, because physical solitude is bearable. Existential solitude, where you are surrounded by people, but none of them really know you because you are pretending to be someone you are not, that solitude kills. It is better to be alone being yourself than surrounded being someone else. The solitude of those who choose freedom is not empty. It's full of something most never experience, full of inner peace, full of integrity, full of the feeling of living authentically. And eventually you find other people who also chose freedom, who also paid the price, who also understood that everyone's approval means betraying yourself. And these relationships are different. They're based on who you really are, not who you pretend to be. They're deep because they're honest. They're lasting because they're real. Grayson found these people. Not many, but enough. And he built a life surrounded by the few, who knew him deeply instead of the many who only knew the mask. December 1944, Christmas Eve. Grayson's unit was on the defensive in Belgium. Extreme cold, low morale. A military chaplain named Lieutenant Henry Carter was visiting the trenches, offering words of comfort. He stopped beside Grayson and asked if he wanted to pray. Grayson replied, "Father, I pray every day, but I don't pray asking permission to survive. I pray thanking God for giving me the ability to decide, for giving me free will, for making me responsible for my own life." Carter was surprised. He asked what he meant. Grayson explained, "Most men pray asking God to solve their problems, asking for signs, asking for clear direction, asking Him to decide for them. But I believe God has already given us the greatest possible authorization. He made us in His image. He gave us the ability to choose, and He expects us to use that ability, not to remain paralyzed waiting for Him to do for us what He has empowered us to do for ourselves." Carter remained silent for a long time. Then he said something Grayson never forgot. You understood something that most religious people will never understand. God doesn't want servants who need constant permission. He wants children who take responsibility. The Bible is full of men who acted based on their own judgment and accepted the consequences. Abraham, Moses, David, Paul. None of them waited for detailed permission for every step. They heard the general call and made specific decisions based on their own discernment. Because faith isn't waiting for God to make decisions for you. It's trusting that He has given you the capacity to make wise decisions and accept the consequences. That conversation profoundly changed Grayson's spirituality. He realized he had confused faith with passivity. He had confused trust in God with refusing to take authority over his own life. In his journals, Grayson wrote a devastating reflection. I saw religious men die waiting for God to save them when God had given them everything they needed to save themselves. I saw men pray for courage when they already had courage, but awaited divine permission to use it. I saw men ask for clear signs when God had already given them free will, reason, and discernment. And I realized that the greatest insult to God is not denying His existence. It is denying the capabilities He gave you. It is living as if you don't have the authority He Himself granted. It is expecting Him to live your life for you when He created you precisely so that you would live for yourself. Grayson understood that true spirituality does not eliminate personal responsibility, it amplifies it. Because if God created you with the capacity to choose, then every choice you make is a sacred act. Every decision you make is an exercise of divine authority within you. You may be using faith as an excuse not to take ownership of your own life. You may be waiting for God to give you detailed permission for every move when He has already given you general permission through free will. You may be praying for clear signs when you already have inner discernment. You may be asking Him to decide for you when He created you precisely so that you would decide for yourself. And while you wait, you call it faith, patience, surrender. But it is merely fear disguised as spirituality. It is a refusal to grow disguised as humility. It is intellectualized cowardice as a religious virtue. Grayson believed that God wanted him to take full responsibility for his own life, to make difficult decisions, to bear the consequences, to live fully, using all the abilities he had received, and that this was not pride. It was honoring the gift of conscious existence. The final authorization doesn't come from parents, society, circumstances, or even constant divine signs. It comes from understanding that you have already been authorized. The moment you were born with the capacity to choose, you received full permission to live fully. And waiting for additional authorizations is to refuse the original gift. It's living as if you weren't created free when freedom is your fundamental nature. Grayson lived the rest of his life in this truth. He made decisions, assumed consequences, carried responsibility. And when he died, the priest who conducted the funeral said, he lived as God intended, not as a servant waiting for orders, but as a son assuming his inheritance. That's the difference. Servants wait for permission. Sons assume the authority given to them from birth. May 1945. The war in Europe had ended. Grayson was in Berlin looking at the rubble. Around him, soldiers celebrated. They hugged, they cried with relief. But Grayson was quiet, processing something. A young soldier approached and asked, "Sergeant, what are you going to do now that the war is over?" Grayson looked at him and replied, "War never ends. It just changes battlefields. You think you're going home and everything will be all right. But you'll find out that the hardest war is waiting. The war against the version of yourselves that will want to go back to the comfortable prison, that will want to ask for permission again, that will want to live by other people's expectations. And if you lose this war, then everything we've lived here was wasted." The soldier didn't understand at that moment, but 20 years later, he wrote a letter to Grayson saying that those words had saved his life. When Grayson's grandson found the diaries decades later, the last entry was from a week before his death. Grayson was 83 years old. He wrote, "I've spent my whole life teaching that no one will give you permission to live, and I see now at the end that most people die without ever having lived, not because they didn't have time, not because they didn't have resources, not because they didn't have the ability, but because they waited for permission that never came. They waited for someone to tell them it was okay to be free, and they died waiting, prisoners of an invisible authority that only existed in their own heads. The tragedy is not dying. The tragedy is dying without ever having taken command of one's own existence. You are at this point of choice now. You can continue living as you live, waiting for permission, asking for approval, shaping your life based on others' expectations, postponing transformation until you are ready, pretending to be someone you're not to maintain superficial relationships, praying that God will decide for you instead of using the abilities He gave you. And you can live like that until you die. Many do. They exist comfortably, die peacefully, and are buried without ever having truly lived. Or you can do what Grayson did on that beach in June 1944. You can simply decide, without waiting to be ready, without seeking validation, without asking permission. You can take full authority over your own life and accept all the consequences that come. The difference between these two choices is the difference between existing and living, between surviving and thriving, between being a prisoner and being free. Grayson spent 83 years demonstrating that true freedom doesn't come from the absence of responsibility. It comes from taking full responsibility. It doesn't come from doing what you want without consequences. It comes from doing what you must and bearing the consequences without blaming anyone. It doesn't come from denying the authority of others over you. It comes from taking full authority over yourself, and that's terrifying. It's lonely sometimes. It's always difficult, but it's the only way to live with dignity, the only way to reach the end and look back without devastating regret for having wasted the gift of existence waiting for someone to authorize you to open the gift. Grayson can no longer fight this war, but you can, and you don't have to fight alone. Every person who understands this message, who recognizes the invisible prison, who decides to stop asking for permission, becomes part of the platoon, becomes a soldier in the war against the voluntary slavery that silently destroys humanity. So heed Sergeant Grayson's last order. Don't abandon this mission. Like this video now, declaring that you understand. Subscribe to this channel, joining the platoon of people who chose freedom over approval. And leave a comment, anything, telling us which part of this message impacted you the most. Helping this channel bring more stories of soldiers like Grayson who paid in blood for lessons that can save your life today. Do it now, because Grayson died free. The question is, will you die free, or will you die waiting for permission to live? Sergeant Michael Grayson spent 3 years on World War II battlefields watching capable men die, not because they were weak, but because they waited for permission to be strong. He discovered that the most efficient slavery has no visible chains. You remain a prisoner because you believe you need external authorization to live fully. 80 years later, you face the same war. Not against Germans or Japanese, but against the version of yourself that has been conditioned to wait for approval before acting, validation before deciding, permission before authentically existing. The difference between freedom and imprisonment lies not in external circumstances. It lies in the willingness to assume full authority over one's own choices, regardless of who approves or disapproves. Answer now. What area of your life do you most often ask for permission instead of simply deciding career, relationships, personal dreams, or how you live each day? And what prevents you from taking full control of that area today?